The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine sat in the morning room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. She stared out at the gardens where fallen leaves scattered across the paths like memories she couldn't quite grasp. The doctors had been gentle but clear during yesterday's appointment. The words echoed in her mind with a cruel persistence that made her chest tighten with each breath. William found her there an hour later, still in the same position, still holding the same cup. He didn't need to ask what she was thinking about. The weight of unspoken words hung between them like a heavy curtain. He settled beside her on the window seat, his presence warm and familiar, yet somehow different now that everything had changed. "The children will be home from school soon," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same careful tone he'd used since they'd left the hospital. Catherine nodded, knowing that behind his calm exterior, he was fighting the same battle she was. How do you tell your children that the world they know is about to shift in ways they can't yet understand? The palace staff moved through their routines with practiced discretion, but Catherine could sense the subtle changes. The way conversation stopped when she entered a room. The extra gentleness in Maria's voice when she brought the afternoon post. The concerned glances that people thought she didn't notice. Word had a way of traveling through these ancient walls. Even when wrapped in the strictest confidence, Catherine's phone buzzed with messages from her sister Pippa, who had sensed something was wrong during their brief conversation that morning. The outside world continued its relentless pace. Unaware that behind the palace gates, a family was quietly preparing for a journey that would test everything they thought they knew about strength, love, and letting go. As the afternoon light began to fade, Catherine made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not retreat into the shadows of this diagnosis. She would not become a victim of circumstances beyond her control. Instead, she would face whatever came with the same grace she had brought to every other challenge in her public life. But first, she and William needed to find a way to tell their story on their own terms. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the corridors as George, Charlotte, and Louis returned from their day at school, their voices bright with the innocence of youth. Catherine stood up, finally setting down the cold tea, and smoothed her dress. William reached for her hand, and together they walked toward the sound of their children's voices, carrying with them the weight of knowledge that would soon change everything. In the weeks that followed, Catherine found herself paying attention to details she had previously taken for granted. The way William's eyes crinkled when he laughed at Louis's silly jokes, the serious concentration on Charlotte's face when she practiced piano, George's growing resemblance to his father as he navigated the awkward transition from boy to young man. These moments became precious in a way that felt both beautiful and heartbreaking. The royal calendar continued its demanding pace, but Catherine began to approach each engagement with a new perspective. Every handshake with a charity patron, every conversation with a young person struggling with mental health challenges, every moment spent highlighting causes close to her heart took on deeper meaning. She wasn't just fulfilling royal duties anymore. She was creating a legacy that would outlast whatever lay ahead. Late at night, when the palace grew quiet and the children were asleep, Catherine and William would sit together in their private sitting room and talk about things they had never needed to discuss before. Practical matters that felt surreal in their ordinariness. Emotional preparations that seemed impossible to make. Plans for a future that looked different than anything they had imagined when they first fell in love as university students. The irony wasn't lost on Catherine that she had spent years learning how to live in the public eye, mastering the art of revealing just enough of herself while keeping the most precious parts private. While facing the biggest challenge of her life, she found herself drawing on those same skills in reverse, learning how to be completely honest with the people who mattered most, while maintaining the composure that duty demanded. The decision to tell their children came on a Thursday evening after Charlotte's ballet recital. The family had gathered in the cozy sitting room that served as their private retreat from the formality of palace life. George was sprawled on the carpet with his homework, while Charlotte practiced her positions at the makeshift bar William had installed near the window. Louis, still in his school uniform, was building an elaborate castle with his wooden blocks. Catherine watched, her children with a mixture of fierce love and protective instinct. These three beautiful souls who had brought such joy and purpose to her life deserved honesty, even if the truth was difficult to bear. William caught her eye across the room and nodded slightly. They had rehearsed this conversation in their minds countless times, but nothing could truly prepare them for the reality of it. "Children, can you come sit with Mama and Papa for a moment?" William's voice was gentle but carried the weight of importance. George looked up from his mathematics homework, immediately sensing the shift in atmosphere. Charlotte stopped mid-ply, her young face already showing concern. Even Louis seemed to understand that something significant was happening. They gathered on the large sofa. The children nestled between their parents like they had done countless times before during bedtime stories or family movie nights, but this time felt different. Catherine reached for Charlotte's hand while William placed his arm around George's shoulders. Louis crawled into Catherine's lap, his small body warm and trusting. "You know how much Papa and I love you, don't you?" Catherine began, her voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Three heads nodded solemnly. Sometimes in life, families face challenges that are scary and hard to understand. We wanted to tell you together as a family that Mama is sick. The word sick hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of confusion and fear. George, at 11, was old enough to understand that this wasn't about a common cold or flu. His face grew pale as he processed the implications. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears she was trying hard not to shed. While Louis looked back and forth between his parents, not quite grasping the gravity, but sensing the sadness. William took over, his voice carefully controlled. "The doctors are going to help Mama get better, and we're going to face this together as a family. Nothing about how much we love each other is going to change." He paused, looking at each child individually. "But there might be times when Mama needs extra rest, or when our schedules need to be different than usual." The questions came slowly at first, then in a rush. George wanted to know about treatments and timelines with the logical mind he had inherited from his father. Charlotte worried about whether her mother would be able to attend her upcoming school play. Louis simply asked if Mama was going to die with the brutal honesty that only young children possess. Catherine pulled him closer, her heart breaking at the directness of his question. "I'm going to fight very hard to stay with you for a very long time," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "And we're going to make sure every day we have together is special." That night, after the children had been tucked into bed with extra hugs and reassurances, Catherine and William sat in their bedroom feeling emotionally drained but also relieved. The hardest conversation of their lives was behind them, and while it hadn't been easy, it had been honest and filled with love. They had given their children the gift of truth, even when that truth was painful in the days that followed. The family dynamic shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. George became more protective of his mother, offering to carry her bags or bringing her tea without being asked. Charlotte started drawing pictures of their family with extra rainbows and hearts. Her way of expressing love she didn't have words. For Louis, in his innocence, simply wanted to spend more time cuddling with Mama, as if his presence alone could make everything better. The children's schools were quietly informed, and their teachers became extra attentive to any signs of distress or behavioral changes. Catherine was grateful for the discretion and support, knowing that her children needed normalcy in their daily routines, even as their home. Life was adjusting to new realities. Catherine found herself marveling at the resilience of children there. Ability to absorb difficult information and continue finding joy in small things. George still got excited about football matches. Charlotte still insisted on wearing her favorite dress even when it didn't match. Louis still told elaborate stories about his imaginary adventures. Their innocence and adaptability became a source of strength for both their parents, the palace staff, many of whom had watched the children grow up, rallied around the family with quiet efficiency. Extra care was taken to maintain routines, and special efforts were made to create moments of joy and laughter. The head chef began preparing Catherine's favorite meals without being asked. The groundskeeper made sure the gardens were always perfect for the children's outdoor play. Love expressed itself in countless small acts of service. The treatment schedule began on a gray Monday morning in late October. Catherine had chosen to start her chemotherapy at a private facility in London, away from the public eye, but close enough to home that William could easily visit between his royal duties. The decision to undergo treatment privately rather than at one of the SS hospitals she frequently visited as a patron was practical rather than preferential. Privacy during this vulnerable time wasn't a luxury, but a necessity for her family's well-being. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's oncologist, had become more than just a medical professional over the past few weeks. She was a lifeline, a source of hope, and someone who understood the unique pressures of treating a patient whose health was of national interest. Her calm demeanor and honest communication style had won both Catherine and William's trust from their first meeting. Today is about establishing your baseline and getting your body accustomed to the treatment, Dr. Mitchell explained as Catherine settled into the comfortable reclining chair that would become familiar over the coming months. Some patients experience fatigue, others have minimal side effects initially. Every person responds differently. William sat beside her, his laptop open to royal correspondence, but his attention entirely focused on his wife. He had rearranged his schedule to be present for every treatment session, a decision that spoke volumes about his priorities. Royal duties could wait. Nothing was more important than being Catherine's anchor during these difficult hours. The first infusion took longer than expected, giving them time to talk about everything and nothing. They discussed Charlotte's upcoming parent-teacher conference, George's growing interest in environmental conservation, and Louis's latest obsession with dinosaurs. These normal family conversations felt precious in the sterile medical environment, reminders of the life they were fighting to preserve and protect. Catherine found herself studying other patients in the treatment center, each fighting their own private battle against disease. An elderly man reading poetry to his wife, a young mother scrolling through photos of her children, a businessman taking work calls between doses, maintaining normalcy in whatever way he could. Their courage inspired her, and she realized that despite her unique circumstances, she was part of a larger community of fighters. The side effects began gradually. The fatigue hit first, a bone-deep tiredness that was unlike anything Catherine had experienced before. Simple tasks like climbing the stairs to the children's bedrooms became monumental efforts. Her famous hair, which had graced countless magazine covers and sparked trends around the world, began to thin and lose its luster. William watched these changes with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. He had always been attracted to Catherine's strength and grace, but watching her face each day with determination, despite feeling unwell, revealed depths of character he hadn't fully appreciated before. She never complained, never asked why this was happening to their family. Instead, she focused on making the most of her good days and resting through the difficult ones. The children adapted to their mother's changing energy levels with remarkable understanding. On days when Catherine felt well enough, she maintained as much normalcy as possible, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, and attending school events. On difficult days, they would bring their activities to her, creating art projects on her bedroom floor or watching movies together while she rested. The palace communications team worked carefully to maintain Catherine's privacy while managing public expectations about her reduced schedule. Official engagements were quietly postponed or canceled, with explanations that cited personal reasons without providing details. The British public, known for their protective feelings toward Catherine, respected the family's need for privacy. During this time, Catherine's parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, became frequent visitors to Kensington Palace. Their presence provided practical support and emotional comfort, reminding Catherine of the loving foundation that had shaped her into the woman she had become. Carol, in particular, became an invaluable source of strength, sharing stories of her own mother's resilience during difficult times. The rhythm of treatment days became familiar: early morning preparation, the drive to the clinic, hours of infusion while watching movies or reading, the careful journey home, and the subsequent days of recovery. William learned to read Catherine's subtle signals about how she was feeling, becoming expert at providing comfort without being overprotective. On one particularly difficult day, when the nausea was overwhelming and the fatigue felt crushing, Catherine experienced a moment of doubt that shook her to her core. Sitting in their bedroom with rain pattering against the windows, she wondered if she was strong enough to continue fighting. William found her crying quietly, the first time she had allowed herself to fully break down since the diagnosis. Scared, she whispered, the admission feeling like both a weakness and a relief. William held her close, his own tears mixing with hers as they faced the full weight of their fear together. In that moment of vulnerability, their bond deepened in ways that years of happiness had never achieved. They were no longer just husband and wife or future king and queen. They were two people fighting for their future together, drawing strength from their love for each other and their children. December brought an unexpected gift wrapped in the form of better than expected test results. Dr. Mitchell's smile was genuine as she shared the latest scans with Catherine and William, pointing out areas where the tumors had shrunk more significantly than anyone had dared to hope. The treatment was working, and working well. This is exactly what we wanted to see, Dr. Mitchell explained, her professional composure unable to hide her obvious pleasure at the positive developments. Your body is responding beautifully to the chemotherapy. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is very encouraging news. Catherine felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. The constant weight of uncertainty that had settled on her shoulders began to lift, replaced by something she had been afraid to feel: hope. William squeezed her hand so tightly it almost hurt, his relief evident in the way his entire body seemed to exhale tension. He had been carrying for weeks. The timing felt like a Christmas miracle. Children had been carefully watching their parents for signs of how the treatment was progressing, their young hearts carrying worries that no child should have to bear. Now, for the first time since the diagnosis, Catherine and William could offer genuine optimism along with their reassurances. That evening, they gathered the children in the same sitting room where they had first shared the difficult news. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different. Catherine's eyes sparkled with tears of joy rather than sorrow as she explained that the medicine was working better than the doctors had expected. George, who had been quietly researching cancer treatments on his own, asked intelligent questions about remission and long-term prognosis. His maturity in handling the situation both impressed and saddened his parents, who recognized that this experience had forced him to grow up faster than they would have liked. Charlotte bounced with excitement, her natural optimism finally free to shine through the worry she had been carrying. Louis, with the beautiful simplicity of childhood, simply announced that he knew Mama would get better because she was the strongest person in the world. The positive news energized Catherine in ways that went beyond the physical. She began to envision a future that extended beyond the next treatment cycle. Plans that had been put on hold started to resurface in conversations with William. She talked about Charlotte's upcoming birthday party, George's transition to secondary school, and Louise's growing personality with an enthusiasm that had been missing for months. Catherine's relationship with her illness began to evolve from one of fearful endurance to determined partnership. She started keeping a journal, documenting not just the physical aspects of treatment, but the emotional journey she was traveling. Writing became a form of therapy, helping her process feelings that were too complex to share even with William. The public began to notice subtle changes in the official photographs released by the palace. Catherine's smile, while sometimes tired, carried a brightness that spoke of inner strength rather than mere duty. Her choice to wear bright colors during her limited public appearances sent a message of hope that resonated with people around the world who were facing their own health battles. Letters and cards arrived daily at Kensington Palace from well-wishers who didn't know the specifics of Catherine's situation but sensed that the royal family was going through something significant. Many shared their own stories of illness and recovery, creating an invisible network of support that touched Catherine deeply. She insisted on reading every single message, finding inspiration in the courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. The palace staff noticed the change in atmosphere as well. The careful quietness that had characterized the previous months began to give way to more natural rhythms. Laughter returned to the corridors. Plans for future engagements started appearing on Catherine's calendar again, albeit with built-in flexibility to accommodate her ongoing treatment schedule. Catherine's medical team was cautiously optimistic but realistic about the journey ahead. Months of treatment remained, and the possibility of setbacks couldn't be ignored. However, the positive response gave everyone involved reason to believe that full recovery was not just possible, but probable. The approaching Christmas season took on special significance for the Wales family. Traditions that might have felt overwhelming just weeks earlier now seemed precious and important. Catherine threw herself into holiday preparations with an energy that surprised everyone, including herself. She insisted on personally selecting gifts for each child, planning the holiday menu, and decorating their private quarters with an attention to detail that spoke of someone who truly appreciated the gift of being present for another Christmas. William watched his wife's transformation with amazement and profound gratitude. The woman he had fallen in love with at university, who had captured his heart with her strength and grace, was revealing new depths of both qualities. Her battle with cancer was teaching both of them about resilience, priority, and the preciousness of ordinary moments. As December progressed and the treatment continued to show positive results, Catherine began to think about how this experience would shape her future role as a member of the royal family. She had always been passionate about mental health advocacy, but now she understood in a visceral way what it meant to face your deepest fears and find strength you didn't know you possessed. This knowledge, hard-won through personal struggle, would undoubtedly inform her future charitable work and public engagements in ways she was only beginning to understand. The final chemotherapy session arrived on a crisp February morning with an air of celebration that seemed almost surreal after months of medical routines. Catherine had marked this date on her calendar with a gold star, and as she settled into the familiar treatment chair for the last time, she felt a mixture of relief, accomplishment, and cautious hope that was difficult too. Described Dr. Mitchell had warned them that completing chemotherapy was often an emotional milestone that patients underestimated. "You've been in treatment mode for months," she explained. "Your body and mind have adapted to this rhythm. Finishing can actually feel overwhelming because you're suddenly without the security of active treatment." Catherine understood what she meant. The weekly medical appointments, the structured treatment schedule, and the constant monitoring had become a strange form of comfort. Knowing that medicine was actively fighting the cancer in her system had provided a sense of control over an uncontrollable situation. Now, as the final drugs flowed through the fore, she was entering a new phase that felt both liberating and terrifying. William had brought champagne to mark the occasion, though they would save the actual celebration until they were home with the children. The treatment center staff, who had become like family over the past months, gathered to mark Catherine's graduation from active treatment. Nurse Rebecca, who had administered most of Catherine's infusions, presented her with a small photo album documenting her journey through treatment, complete with pictures of the family visits and the small celebrations that had marked good news along the way. The drive home from the clinic felt different than all the previous journeys. Instead of focusing on managing side effects or preparing for the next appointment, Catherine found herself really looking at London for the first time in months. The city seemed more vibrant, the spring flowers more beautiful, the ordinary bustle of life more precious than she remembered. The children had planned a surprise celebration with the help of their grandparents and the palace staff. When Catherine and William arrived home, they were greeted by handmade banners, Charlotte's carefully practiced piano performance, and Louise's enthusiastic dance routine. George, ever the thoughtful one, had written a speech that brought tears. To everyone's eyes, with its mature expression of pride in his mother's courage, "Mama, you showed us that being brave doesn't mean not being scared," he read from his carefully written notes. "It means doing what you have to do even when you are scared. You're our hero." The simple words carried the weight of months of watching his mother face each day with determination despite the challenges. The weeks following treatment completion brought unexpected emotional challenges. Catherine experienced what Dr. Mitchell had called survivor's guilt, a common response among cancer patients who achieve good outcomes. She thought often about the other patients she had met during treatment, wondering about their progress and feeling somehow undeserving of her positive results. The transition back to a more normal schedule proved more difficult than anticipated. Catherine's energy levels, while improved, were still not what they had been before diagnosis. She had to learn to pace herself carefully, balancing her natural inclination to return to full royal duties. Immediately, with the reality of her body's need for continued recovery, the first public engagement since completing treatment was carefully chosen: a visit to a children's cancer ward at a London hospital. Catherine had specifically requested this engagement, feeling that her experience gave her a new understanding of what families facing childhood cancer endured. The visit was private, with no media presence, allowing her to connect authentically with patients and families who were fighting battles similar to her own. Meeting 8-year-old Emma, who was undergoing treatment for leukemia, Catherine found herself face-to-face with her own journey reflected in a child's brave eyes. Emma's mother, Sarah, recognized something in Catherine that went beyond royal sympathy. "You understand, don't you?" she said quietly. Catherine nodded, no words necessary between two mothers who had faced their worst fears and found strength they didn't know they possessed. The regular follow-up appointments became new milestones to anticipate. 3-month scans, 6-month checkups, and annual comprehensive examinations marked the path forward. Each clear result was a victory to celebrate. But the appointments also served as reminders that vigilance would be a permanent part of Catherine's life going forward. William's role in Catherine's recovery extended far beyond the practical support he had provided during treatment. He became her advocate for rest when her natural inclination was to push too hard too fast. He helped her recognize the signs of fatigue before they became overwhelming. Most importantly, he continued to treat her as the same strong, capable woman he had always known, refusing to let her illness become the defining characteristic of their relationship. The experience had changed their marriage in profound ways. They had faced the ultimate test of in sickness and in health much earlier in their relationship than they had expected. And they had emerged stronger and more connected. Their communication had deepened, their priorities had crystallized, and their appreciation for everyday moments had intensified in ways that would benefit them for the rest of their lives. As spring turned to summer, Catherine began to envision a return to more regular royal duties. However, she was determined that her future work would be informed by her personal experience. She began developing plans for initiatives that would support cancer patients and their families. Drawing on her intimate understanding of the journey from diagnosis through treatment and recovery, the 1-year anniversary of Catherine's diagnosis arrived with little fanfare, but deep reflection. She had chosen to mark the date privately, spending the morning in quiet contemplation in the gardens at Kensington Palace where she had first processed the shocking news. The woman who sat among the roses was fundamentally the same person who had received that devastating phone call 12 months earlier. Yet she was also profoundly changed. Catherine's hair had grown back, though it was slightly different in texture and color than before treatment. She had learned to see these small changes not as losses, but as marks of survival, physical reminders of a battle fought and won. Her relationship with her own body had evolved from taking health for granted to appreciating every day of strength and vitality as a precious gift. The medical monitoring that would continue for years had become routine rather than anxiety-provoking. Dr. Mitchell remained cautiously optimistic about Catherine's prognosis, and each clear scan added to the growing confidence that the cancer had been successfully treated. The specter of recurrence would always exist, but it no longer dominated Catherine's thoughts or shaped her daily decisions. William found himself marveling at the resilience of their family unit. The children had not only survived their mother's illness but had grown stronger and more compassionate through the experience. George's maturity and thoughtfulness had deepened without robbing him of his childhood joy. Charlotte's natural empathy had expanded to encompass a sophisticated understanding of suffering and healing. Louis, while still young, had learned that families face difficult times together and emerged stronger for the experience. The decision to slowly return to public duties had been carefully considered and strategically planned. Catherine's first major appearance was at the annual Trooping the Color ceremony, where she stood on the Buckingham Palace balcony with her family, waving to crowds who had followed her journey from afar. The public's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, with many noting the special radiance in her smile and the obvious joy in her interaction with her children. Behind the scenes, Catherine had been working with her private secretary and charitable organizations to develop new initiatives focused on cancer support and family resilience. Her experience had given her insights that couldn't be learned from briefing papers or charitable visits alone. She understood the isolation that patients felt, the financial pressures families faced, and the long-term emotional impact of serious illness in ways that would inform her advocacy for years to come. The relationship between Catherine and William had emerged from the crisis stronger than either had imagined possible. They had learned to communicate about their deepest fears, to support each other through uncertainty, and to find joy even in the midst of difficulty. Their public appearances together now carried an authenticity that resonated with people around the world who had watched their grace under pressure. The letters from well-wishers had never stopped coming. Catherine continued to read as many as possible. Stories of other families facing cancer, messages of support from fellow survivors, and expressions of admiration for her handling of the situation filled boxes in her private office. She had begun responding to selected letters personally, particularly those from young mothers facing similar diagnoses. Catherine's perspective on her role within the royal family had evolved significantly. While she had always taken her duties seriously, her experience with illness had clarified her priorities in ways that would guide her future service. She was determined to use her platform to address real suffering and provide genuine support. Two people facing life's most difficult challenges. The quiet moments had become as important as the public ones. Evening conversations with William about the children's development, weekend family activities that required no official photographer, and simple pleasures like reading bedtime stories had taken on deeper meaning. Catherine had learned that a life well lived was measured not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of loving, present moments, as she prepared for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. Catherine carried with her the hard-won knowledge that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. The fear of cancer would always be part of her story, but it would not define her future. Instead, it had become the foundation for a deeper understanding of resilience, compassion, and the preciousness of ordinary life. The quiet goodbye she and William had feared might be necessary had transformed into a quiet hello to a new chapter of their lives together. They had faced their worst fears and discovered that love, determination, and hope could carry them through anything. The nation that had watched their journey from afar had witnessed not just a medical recovery, but a profound demonstration of the human capacity to endure, adapt, and ultimately thrive in the face of life's greatest challenges. Looking toward the future, Catherine knew that her experience would inform every aspect of her continuing role as a mother, wife, and public figure. The woman who had once worried about fulfilling royal expectations had learned that authenticity and vulnerability, rather than perfection, were her greatest strengths. Her story would continue, shaped by, but not limited by, the year that had tested everything she thought she knew about herself and her family's capacity for courage.